We'll drop by.
Oh, that's being great.
They can't hear us, yeah.
Turn these mics on, they'll be able to hear you. You don't have to pick it up or anything. It can.
That's what this thing is?
Yep, whatever is green means it's on.
Okay.
So you want us to turn it on?
No, you can keep it on the whole time. It should last for.
It's still red.
Oh, is it still red?
It might not be.
Maybe I just hit it all the way. Let's see. I haven't decorated it. Here we go. We're good. Right.
I don't know if I really.
Give it about a minute. We'll get started.
Whatever it is.
Hello, everybody. For folks joining online, we'll get started in about 1 minute, giving the virtual audience a second to join. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Environmental Law Institute's first installment of this year's summer school series of Introduction to Careers in Environmental Law and Policy. My name is Madison Calhoun. I'm the Senior Manager of Educational Programs here at ELI. So delighted to see all of you out here in person. I'll be moderating today's program. Each summer, ELI convenes a complimentary seminar series that offers an introduction to the legal and policy foundations of environmental protection in the United States. This year, we'll be offering 4 sessions of our summer school series in a hybrid format. They'll be taking place live at ELI's office in Washington, D.C., and will be streamed via live webinar via Zoom. So we have a good crowd here in person, but we also have a lot of people online. So I'm very excited to see all of you here. We'll also have 4 sessions this year that are just taking place via Zoom webinar. So there will be no in-person option for those. You can see them behind me. You can also find them all on our summer school page, which my colleague will drop in the chat momentarily. Summer school will be taking place each Tuesday throughout June and July, except for the week of Independence Day. We'll be alternating between hybrid and in-person sessions each week. And like I said, you can find all of the information online. In case you can't make a specific session, we will also be recording all of our sessions. We'll upload the recordings to ELI's YouTube page and website within a few business days of each session. Today, we have a great program prepared for all of you. We'll be discussing the ins and outs of careers in environmental law. I have 4 wonderful speakers here beside me. In lieu of reading their biographies, though, I'll be asking them to each explain their career journeys momentarily. However, we've also linked to their biographies on the event webpage, which we'll also drop in the chat. So we highly encourage you to check out their amazing biographies there. Our speakers today are Carol Lynn Green, who's the owner at the law offices of Carol Lynn Green, Christine Perry, who's the staff attorney here at ELI, Alejandra Goyenchea, who's the senior international counsel at Defenders of Wildlife, and last but not least, we have Michael Curley, who's a visiting scholar here at ELI as well. So I'll turn things over to them in a second, but before that, I have a couple more logistical notes to share with all of you. For our virtual audience, the Q&A box and the chat are both open online. We welcome you to post your observations in the chat and to use the chat to communicate with one another if you wish. But if you have any questions you would like our speakers to address, we ask you to please put them in the Q&A box, which is a separate box on Zoom. We'll be taking time for Q&A at the end of the program, but you're welcome to drop your questions in as soon as you think of them. There's no need to wait until the end. For our in-person audience, please do hold your questions until the end. My colleague Sarah Viken at the back will be bringing microphones around. She's also available to help anyone online or in person should anything come up throughout today's program. And then with that, I think we're about ready to get started. I want to take one moment though and thank all of our speakers for being here today and for taking the time to come out to ELI's office. We so appreciate all of your time and energy. Now I have a whole list of questions for you all. We'll try our best to get through as many of them as we can. But to start off, I wanted to ask you if you could please introduce yourself to our audience and tell us about your career journey so far. How did you end up in the field of environmental law? We'll start with Carol first.
Okay, so I am Carol Green, and I'm fortunate as a practicing environmental lawyer that my name is Green. I was born with it. I didn't change my name when I married, and that green defines the focus of my practice. I am a lawyer with my own private practice, but I do want to tell you about my career path because it is a little bit different. And I certainly want to thank ELI for inviting me because it gave me a chance to stop my client work and think about where I've been and where I'm going. So thank you so much. This is great. So let me go back and describe my career path just as an example of a path one might follow. Please keep in mind that there are two hallmarks of my path. One is networking, and two is a question that I've been asked over and over again. Would you ever? So think about those two elements in sort of like Gregorian chant-like fashion. I like to say that my environmental career began when I was appointed the first assistant section chief of the environmental enforcement section at the Justice Department when it was created to prosecute cases on behalf of EPA. And I think that's really true, but my environmental background actually goes back a little farther than that. And it was, I was practicing as a trial lawyer in the general litigation section at Justice. It was then called Lands and Natural Resources. Today, it's not Lands and Natural Resources, it's Environment and Natural Resources. So this was quite a while ago. In any event, I was there and I was defending government agencies in all sorts of environmental matters, Native Americans, NEPA, public land issues. And I got this job offer to go to General Lit. How did I get that job offer? Here's where the networking element comes in. Lois Schiffer, who is a well-known and brilliant environmental lawyer in town, called me and asked me if I would come and interview for her job that she was leaving at the Center for Law and Social Policy. So I went and interviewed for Lois's job, and Lois said, well, maybe you'd like to go to the Justice Department, Carol. And I had always dreamed of going to the Justice Department. And so as a result of that networking experience, I was able to go to General Lit with Lois. She was the chief of the section, and start my work there. At the time, I was working at EEOC and I was active in the Women's Legal Defense Fund. And that's how I knew Lois. And after practicing in General Lit for a while, I remember being there on a Saturday and this very big and gruff man who happened to be the Assistant Attorney General and unfortunately passed away recently, Jim Mormon, came into my office and barked at me. And he said, Carol, would you ever consider, there it is, would you ever consider going to the new environmental enforcement section and being an assistant chief? And I thought, bad timing. There was a new administration about to come into effect, be elected, and they weren't going to do environmental enforcement. But I sought counsel with a number of people, and they said, too good an opportunity, don't turn it down. So I didn't, and I went. It was fabulous. This is, you know, another aspect of take the challenge, look for the challenges that are offered to you, take the challenges and be ready. And as an assistant chief, I had the most amazing opportunity. It was not long after the Superfund statute was passed, and I got to be on a team that wrote the first Superfund settlement policy. We were figuring out how to do enforcement. and sue big companies and get them to comply with the law. And so there it was, an opportunity that I never expected. So I'm sitting in my office, assistant chief, I've been there a while, and I get a call from a person I knew who was in a law firm who said, would you ever consider leaving the Justice Department and practicing in a private firm? And I thought, oh, I don't really want to do that. But I sought the counsel of a number of people and went to the firm and had the opportunity of working in a different institution and understanding the environmental issues that private clients faced. So I'm in my office at the law firm. At that point, I'm married, I have a child, and I think I really should be closer to home. I should manage my life a little better. And I opened up my own practice. And my own practice, law offices of Carolyn Green, is very much like practicing at a big law firm. I've emulated all those good things I learned about client representation, not forgetting sustainability and being green, and have had a wonderful opportunity to be engaged in many challenges. So I thought about, how do I conclude? What do I tell you? What do I conclude for myself? And I think the answer is there is no conclusion. I'm looking forward to continuing to work and engage in environmental law.
Thank you so much, Carol. We so appreciate it. I'll hand things over next to Christine. I ELI to tell her story.
Hello, everyone. As Madison said, I'm Christine Perry. I'm a staff attorney here at ELI, and I've had a bit of a winding path to a career in environmental law. I, as a creative writing and Spanish double major in undergrad, I thought I wanted to go to law school, but I didn't know I wanted to go to law school, so I thought that's not a great reason. So I lived in Spain for a little bit after college, did some volunteer work, and I got jury duty when I was back in the States, and I was like, well, this is my sign. So I applied for law school while I worked at a bank. And with my Spanish, I did a lot of working with English as second language learners. And I thought, using my Spanish and immigration law, that's a great fit. That's what I'm going to do in law school. That prior to law school and undergrad, that I was very involved with human rights organizations. I thought, well, there's no way I can get a job doing international human rights law. So let's do more domestic human rights. Let's work on humanitarian immigration. So that's what I thought I was going to do in law school. Worked out in Oakland, California for a summer. My third year of law school, all my friends are getting jobs at big firms. I thought, oh no, I don't have a job. What am I going to do? I'm applying, and I went to the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law, and they had a new fellowship for international public service. And I thought, that sounds like me. So I applied, and I had offers to go to London, to Italy, and then to Sweden, and applied for the fellowship, selected, and I went to London to work on international human rights, which I thought it was a unicorn job. And I was thrilled. I was working really all kinds of issues. So, detention issues, freedom of expression, association, assembly. I really dug deep in the rights of persons with disabilities and gender issues. That was really what I focused on while I was in London. But my boss at the time was very interested in economic and social cultural rights, the SDR. And I worked a little bit with him on extraterritorial obligations of companies regarding climate change. So that was really my first taste of international environmental law, but more from a business and human rights perspective. Went on to work for the organization for several years remotely. At that time, we had a new Secretary General that was coming from the environmental world to the human rights world. And we really started to look more at human rights in the environment in my current job. And I thought, my human rights practice really could use more of an environmental lens, that everything really is touched by it, that the rights of persons with disabilities, looking at that climate change is more dangerous for them. And also climate change can exacerbate, but also lead to new disabilities. It's more dangerous for certain groups of people. And so I thought, okay, this is a good time to get more in-depth on environmental law. So it's back in the States looking for what I was going to do next. To that point, I was consulting. I really wanted something more permanent. I wanted to be in an office full time, which it's funny since I got hired spring of 2020 at the Environmental Law Institute. But I got hired because they were looking for someone that spoke Spanish and had experience in international law. That they had a 3-year project in Colombia to train judges on deforestation issues. And I mean, I had very little, if none, environmental experience besides that one amicus brief on extraterritorial obligations. But I thought, I'm applying everywhere. Let's see, sent off my application. I remember it was, I'd wake up panicked and I'd apply at like 3 in the morning because I'm an early morning person. I remember applying and thinking, I'm never going to hear from them. And here I am today. So that's really is a winding path. And in my interview, I mostly talked about human rights and the connection between environmental rights and what I'd like to work on, the intersection between the two. So I was very honest that I don't have a lot of environmental experience, but I can bring something different. I can bring a new perspective and really help deepen your work with a human rights lens while also getting more experience in the environmental world. So I've been here for just over 4 years now, and I'm very happy. So I'm excited to share more with you today.
Thank you so much, Christine. We'll go on now to Alejandra. Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Nice to meet you. I mean, this is fascinating stories from Christine and Calhoun. I mean, I didn't know, and it's very interesting also how they've gotten there. And I think that we each have our unique kind of like little period of time is like, why do we want to go to go into the environmental world? And my path is very different because I studied law from Mexico. I studied law in Mexico. And to me, it's kind of like, I don't know, I have like a corny story, but I used to, like on the spring break, I traveled with my dad. We went into a national, I don't know if it was, national park back then. It's like, I just fell in love with the area. I mean, I was studying law back then, but to me, it was like, oh, I'm going to be, I mean, I went into law, so just backing up a little bit, but I went into law straight from high school. And that's what we do in Mexico, which is like very difficult. It's like, oh my God, from just high school, you have to decide like, yeah, you're going to go into law. So my idea to go into law was to do international law, but I was more like enamored with all the international organizations and at the UN and blah, blah, blah. But I was like, okay, I'm going to take the path of law, go into law to just understand the whole thing. It's kind of like, I was more interested in international relations, but I was like, oh, my law degree will be kind of like a good base for international relations. But I never ever thought about environmental law. So anyway, so I went to the national park and I just felt, we went and talked to an NGO that they were doing a lot of like local work to protect like the park, the forest, and I just loved it. But back then, the environmental law program didn't have, the law department didn't have an environmental, not even an environmental course. I mean, it was like optional, like at the end of the 5 years that you could take. It was kind of like, oh, a little bonus, take environmental law. So I found out about it like until the end, until I graduated. So I was like, okay, there's more time to do anything and figure out what this is about. So I decided to write my thesis because in order to graduate, you need to write a thesis. I'm just like, oh my God, the most boring thing. You need to write something about what you like. Back then I was working in a law firm doing corporate law, so like very boring. So I was like, I'm not going to write the thesis. The most important thing in your life is like into a boring. Sorry for all those corporate lawyers. But it's like, so then that's why I decided to write about thesis about the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. And I was like, I want to write about this. It's going to be fun. And I just loved it. So I decided then to come to American University because American University had a lot of relations, especially on human rights and human rights and law. And I had a teacher in Mexico that she was very close to AU. So I decided to come to AU for my master's and I just loved international environmental law. That's what I wanted to do. And my thing was international environmental law. So same thing going back to Caroline, I started working with teachers and assisting in every little thing I could do. And then one thing to the other, I mean, the only thing is that I came here on a Fulbright scholarship, so I had to go back to my country for 2 years. And I decided to work in the Environmental Enforcement Agency. So I applied a little bit of what I had just learned. Then I decided to come back here for 2 reasons, love and I got married with my husband that's here. But so I did, I mean, but to me, the thing was always kind of like, I want to stay in DC, and I wanted to also study in DC and here in DC because of especially all the opportunities or for internships, for like networking, like coming to these things. I was like, it was just very important for me. It's like, here it's where everything is happening. It's like, I try to go to every legal event. I got a job like studying because I started at a law firm, Baker Butts. I mean, doing kind of like, couldn't work there as a lawyer because I don't have the law degree, but I worked as a paralegal or legal assistant, something like that. But I for environmental issues in Latin America. So kind of like trying to find out everything that was happening in Latin America. But same thing, it's because then I went to one of the courses and same thing. I mean, I tried to go to every legal event and environmental event. And because same thing, the teachers that I had at AU, they were just involved in absolutely everything. I mean, I was working back then with Durwood Zelke, who was the president of the CL of Center for International Environmental Law. So, I mean, I just tried to go to every legal event. I just loved it. Then fast forwarding, I kind of like then found my dream job was working with CITES issues at Defenders of Wildlife. There was an opening and I decided also to give it a shot, and I've been there for more than 15 years. But to me, I mean, it was like, so what I do is I don't go to court because I mean, I don't have a law degree and we don't do that, but it's mostly policy work. And to me, it's just very interesting. I mean, explain when I go to the conventions, I go there as an observer, and it's very interesting because we work then to just kind of like give some advocacy to the governments to try to implement or make decisions on conservation issues that we care about, especially for wildlife. So, and actually the thing too is that I came into wildlife just because of my thesis, because I really loved CITES. But yeah, the niche of like wildlife, it's just a very, 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 very small niche. It's like environmental, it's like very small. And then you even go like even smaller, which is wildlife. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's very, very similar. To me, DC was the place to be just because of so many events, so many things happening. The World Bank, I remember that I went to so many World Bank events and everything like that. But yeah, but here I am. And yeah, thanks. If you have any more questions.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Michael, I'll hand things over to you.
Uh-oh. Well, I should start out by telling you that my story begins in the Johnson administration. And when I was teaching it here at George Washington, in my class, I told them that I was something about the Johnson administration. I was telling some stories about the Johnson administration. And Amit Nadav, I always remember his name, it's wonderful. He raises his hand in the back of the room. He says, Mike, the Johnson administration. He said, let me ask you something. Was this Lyndon or Andrew? Right, so that gives you sort of an idea, right? Anyways, he was Lyndon, and I was a linguistics major at Georgetown, right? And I started working for a congressman that was a friend of my brother's, who had just been elected. And anyways, one of the bills that we were working on, the dean of the University of Buffalo Law School said, you know, anything I can do to help you with this, I will do. And so the congressman said, Michael, it's your bill. You take it away. So I tried to get an appointment with a gentleman named Emmanuel Seller, who was 79 years old. He'd been in Congress 40 years, and he was the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Now I ask you, do you really think that a 79-year-old chairman of the House Judiciary Committee is interested in having a meeting with a 19-year-old boy? No. Okay. So I remembered that the dean had said, I'll do anything to help you with this. So I got in touch with him and brought him down here. And he got the meeting with the Chairman Emmanuel Seller, and everything started to progress very well. And the dean and I were having lunch in the cafeteria after his meeting with Emmanuel Seller, and he said to me, he says, let me just ask you something. He says, what in the hell are you doing with all this this linguistics nonsense? And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, you're working for Congressman McCarthy. You're doing important stuff. Do you like it? And I said, yeah, I love it. And he said, well, then what is all of this linguistics nonsense? I said, well, what do you mean? He says, you should come back and go to law school and get into the business you're in now with the Congressman. And I said, well, I may just do that. I have another year to go though. And he said, no, you don't. And the end of that conversation was I was admitted to law school and after 3 years of college. And so that's how it all started. And from that, as you can tell, one of the things that I was doing, when I was in Buffalo and back working again in politics on the side, right, is none of the young people my age, nobody wanted to handle the issue of jobs. Let me talk about the environment, let me talk about social problems, housing, let me do this, let me do that. And well, what about the environment? No, we couldn't get, jobs. We couldn't get anybody to talk about, to study jobs. So I was the schoolmaster, right? So it was my job. So I did the jobs thing. And I then wound up after the elections in Albany, the capital of New York. I walked with the New York State Legislature, okay? And what did you do to get here? And I said, I was in charge of the jobs issue. And they said, okay, you're going to the Department of Economic Development. And they call it the Commerce Department then, but the Department of Economic Development. And so I went there as general counsel, right? And I was still a kid. It was very nice. And okay, the Office of Economic Development had as a side, sort of a sister agency, a thing called the New York Job Development Authority, which despite its sort of ridiculous name, is a bank. It's the New York State Bank for Economic Development. What did the Job Development Authority do? It issued bonds that are guaranteed by the state of New York and took that money and loaned it to businesses that were creating jobs. Okay, so that's what we did. So anyway, so I was a general counsel, right? And the president of the bank quit. He was not with the governor's group. The governor was glad to get rid of him, glad to see him go. So anyways, okay, so we go out to lunch and say, all right, who's going to take this guy's job? Where are we going to find a new president for the bank? And the governor's, his guy just looked at me and said, Mike, it's going to be you. And I said, I've never made a loan in my life. And he said, you'll have to learn quickly, won't you? And so there we go. So I was the president of the New York Job Development Authority, which I now refer to as the New York State. It's gone. They took the title away and got rid of it. It's the New York State Bank for Economic Development. So here I am, right? A banker. And I get out of government and I'm working with a buddy of mine, I started a company that did exactly what the government agency did. It's exactly what the New York Job Development Authority is. We issued bonds and our bonds were guaranteed by the Continental Insurance Company, not a state, right? Because we got paid for this, right? And the Continental Insurance Company got paid for lending their name. So that's how we took the New York Job Development Authority and replicated it in the private sector. All right, so that's what I was doing. And we sold the company to a thing which was called the Marine Midland Bank. It's now called the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank. So we sold it to them. And so I'm sort of unemployed and looking around. And my buddy, who was doing sort of the same thing I was, he said, Mike, there's over 15,000 water agencies in the United States. He said, don't you think they all need money for pipes and equipment and stuff like this? And it's not pocket change. They got to issue bonds and they get clobbered when they go to the bond market. Don't you think so? And I said, well, yeah, intuitively, yes. So anyways, I banged around and the only place where there are any statistics on water finance is the United States Department of Agriculture started a rural water program in 1941. And so here I am with like 40 years of statistics, right? So I'm living in New York City, so I'm getting on the train every other day and going down to Washington and going to the Department of Agriculture right around the corner and sitting in a room with no windows and boxes with the quarterly reports on the loan program that have never been opened. Right? They sent their report to Washington. They put the report in this room. Nobody ever looked at it, right? So anyways, and I was doing this, and at that time, the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972, and it was grants. That's what they did. And the people at EPA and in Congress realized that, you know, the city of X applies for a $6 million grant to do A, B, C, and D. And that out of the 6 million, $1.5 million goes essentially into somebody's pocket. Or it goes for, you know, leather chairs in the boardroom, or, you know, a couple of limousines for the staff director and all this other stuff. They were embarrassed that the program was wasting money. So the guys at EPA, and I'll tell you, this is one of the questions here is about mentors. This guy winds up to be my mentor. He's the one that puts it all together and tells the Congress, this is nuts. We got to change from a grant to a loan program. So in 1988 or 89, they amend the Clean Water Act and they go from a grant to a loan program. But they forgot one thing. There was nobody at EPA who had ever made a loan, and there was nobody at any of the 50 state environmental agencies who had ever made a loan. So, oops, right? And they found me banging around at the Department of Agriculture, looking at the statistics from 1941, right? And they said, Mike, you're a banker, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And they said, you know how to make loans, don't you? And I said, yeah. And they said, would you show us how to do that? So anyways, that begat a thing that's still around today called the Council of Infrastructure Financing Agencies, CIFA, C-I-F-A, right? And it's the organization of the people who run the state water finance programs in the 50 states, right? And of course, they followed the Clean Water with the Drinking Water Act. So now you got two separate offices doing in each state. Anyway, so that's we started CIFA, and I just started. You know, we had a couple of meetings, you know, quarterly meetings to get everybody to know everybody and everything. And at each of those quarterly meetings, I had to train people on how to make loans. And so somebody, the CIFA people said, let's put all your materials together. Let's put them into monographs so that we can hand them out at the meetings. Fine. And some guy from Times Mirror publishing company shows up at one of the CIFA meetings, and he has this monograph with my stuff. And he says, did you write this? I said, yeah. He says, we'd like you to turn this into a book. So I think Madison was hoping that 10 minutes or more ago that there was an end to my story. And that's pretty much the end of the story, is because the 6 books later, my first book was published by Times Mirror. 5 more books were published by Times Mirror, under a different name. CRC Press is now their name. And one of the 6 books was published by the folks that you're sitting in their chairs, the Environmental Law Institute. So anyway, that's how I got into environmental law. And to me, it's fine, except that, you know, the rest of these questions, you know, like, what do you do when you get up in the morning? When you write books, you write books. And that's, so yeah, I'm writing the 7th book right now, and the 7th book is called The Science of Sustainability. And it's, if anybody's got any good sustainability stories, let me know, because that's where I am right now. I'm writing universities. Carlisle, there's a thing called the Association of AASAG, Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. And so they keep track of stuff at universities and they rank them. And Dickinson University in Pennsylvania is ranked #1 in the country. So I have a nice write-up on Dickinson and I have a nice write-up on Wake Forest, because the #2 guy at EPA, who's an old friend of mine, runs the program down there and he's really into it and really competent. But if you all know of any folks that have some really cool ideas, let me know. Because that's the part of the book that's that I'm finishing up. And the end of the story here, Madison, is I've written 2 novels and I'm writing my 3rd. And the title of the 3rd novel is The Final Climate Change. So there you go. The final climate change.
Thank you, Michael. I so appreciate it. So now that you've all told us about your careers, I want to zoom back out a little bit and ask you all, if you could explain a little bit more about environmental law, because it's very complicated and I'm not sure if everyone in the audience knows exactly what it entails. So in your opinion, what is environmental law and what does being an environmental lawyer mean to you? Any of you can chime in.
Okay, I can start. Please join me. One of the things I've derived from listening to my interesting colleagues here is that there isn't one definition of environmental law. We each see the field or experience or practice the field in a different way. My own definition, particularly what I gathered at the Justice Department, is taking the environmental laws, the enacted laws, clean air, clean water, Superfund, defining what obligations those laws create and knowing what compliance with those laws mean. So that to me, that's an important aspect of environmental law. The other aspect of my practice, and that I get from what I've done earlier, is that I take the environmental laws, particularly the Superfund statute, and educate companies that are engaging in business and real estate transactions, 1, to know what their obligations are, and 2, to use the laws creatively to get others with whom they're negotiating to help achieve compliance or cleanup or the like. So that's one very narrow box of environmental law. And I turn this discussion over to my colleagues.
I don't know if I'm going to respond exactly to the question, but I just wanted to add that environmental law is just not environmental law and we cannot see it by itself. I mean, as Christine practices it, and I admire a lot of people. I mean, I know other human rights and environmental law lawyers, which I think it's fantastic, but you cannot just do environmental law by itself. You have human rights and environment. I mean, environmental law will just include so much more. And I think that also something that we see with, for example, with environmental crimes, specifically, some of the ones that are the most ignored. I mean, it's including wildlife crime. You cannot just address wildlife crime by itself, but you can always bring other statutes like together, and actually you might be more successful in bringing and practicing environmental law together with financial crime. And there's just so many other more. So I think that, I just want to say that today we cannot just see environmental law by itself. It just includes so much more. So I think that if you just want to practice environmental law, I think that there's so many other instances that they're just very helpful. I think that, all the financial aspects. So I think that environmental law needs to be very holistic.
And I also think that I agree with that 100%. The sustainability is the word that's opened the door. Because what is sustainability? It refers to ESG, environmental and social governance. And the S in social opens a door that nobody's ever seen before. It's, equal opportunity, men, women, race, the whole age, the whole gamut of concerns that are S's, right, are now in the game. So it's no longer just, does the water stink? It's, what's your workforce made up of? And how do you recruit? That, think questions like that too. So it's gotten a lot broader. And I think that's thanks to the word sustainability that's sort of dragging, the social, the S and the ESG into the game.
And I agree with what everyone has said, but touching off of what Michael and Alejandro have been speaking about, looking at environmental justice, capital E, capital J in the US, that's coupled with civil rights, Title VI, things like that. Looking at international environmental law working in Peru, we're looking at how organized crime statutes can be used to help prosecute wildlife trafficking, things like that. So you're never going to just look at environmental. You're going to, if you're thinking about going to law school, you're going to be taking administrative law classes. You'd be taking business law classes because it's all coupled together. And I guess, for myself, I don't think of myself as an environmental lawyer. I think of myself as a human rights lawyer working in environmental law, and that they are so closely related.
Wonderful. Now I want to zoom in even deeper on that. So going to talk about logistics a little bit, or more of day-to-day work in environmental law. So going to combine two of our questions here. What does a typical day at your job look like? And then could you also let our audience know if you work in person at an office, or remotely from home, or a mix of both? What does it look like today to work in environmental law?
I have a cute story that I can start this off with. My friend's daughter was probably 4 at the time, and I was working a lot in the Colombian Amazon. And she asked her that we had lunch or we had breakfast around the corner, and I was like, oh, I need to go to the office now. And she asked her mom after I left, well, how does she get to the jungle from here? Because she thought that that's where I went. And so when I was in the Amazon rainforest, I sent a picture and I said, oh, please tell Asia, I'm at my office. But for me, that at ELI, we do have a hybrid system. So I'm in the office 2 days a week. I'm remote 2 days a week. But when I'm traveling, I haven't traveled in a couple of months, but going on mission to Honduras in a few months. So I'll be there, working on location. Then I'll go to Guatemala after that. So it really depends on what projects I'm doing. But my typical day, it's a lot of meetings with external partners at ELI as well. I guess I don't really have a typical day. It just depends on the project, the deadlines. We do a lot of reports here at ELI, a lot of trainings, as well as, managing other staff members. So working with our intern program and our research associates. So there's, external facing, but also internal facing work that my job consists of, and sometimes speaking on panels. My job at ELI is flexible. So last semester I taught at American University, that it kind of allows you some flexibility, which is really wonderful.
I'll connect because it's similar. I mean, I'm just because my typical work day is also very similar. I mean, it depends. Mostly my job as a kind of, like I said, it's going to the conventions, to the meetings. And so it's, I mean, I do all the prep work before going to the meeting. So it's kind of like either contacting countries to see how we can support governments, how we can support them, or what kind of information we can bring to them for them to prepare for the meetings. It's like, oh, is there something? It's like, oh my God, we saw something that came out, and like, here is a summary, here is a very important for you for this meeting. So as I said, we're observers, and we are kind of like informational providers to them, and kind of like to be able to flag them, this is what happened. So my kind of like all the preparation that we do before the convention meetings, or just like scientific meetings or enforcement meetings. So and yeah, we do it same thing. It's hybrid. It's 2 days. So I mean, that was after the pandemic, 2 days home, but and then 3 days in the office. But yeah, I'm kind of, it's like very, I mean, the 4 squares of my office. I mean, I haven't had the pleasure of going to the jungle, I don't know, I'm an office person. So yeah, I don't know if I can be, but yeah, that's mostly what I do, yeah.
One of the things I've noticed since I have my own practice and can dictate my own schedule is that when I get up in the morning and start working right away and get a momentum going, I'm there in my home office, not going anywhere. And you know what I realized? I realized that that's disadvantageous, that I don't see people. I don't engage with people. I have plenty of Zoom meetings, but it's really not quite the same. And so I'm trying really hard to forget that affect and go into my office. And what's so interesting to me is when I started doing that, people would come into my office and ask me questions. And then there were more teaming opportunities. So I'm tying my hands and not staying at my home office, even though the potential is there.
Needless to say, I don't, where I work, essentially is gathering information. And it can be anywhere. And so, at the home and the office are the same for me because, it's picking up the phone and getting in touch with the guy that's in charge of the sustainability program at Carlisle College or things like that, which is absolutely fine with me. In my earlier years, I visited 54 countries for EPA and the World Resources Institute. I worked in 42 of them. And you're looking at a man who builds 15 water systems in Kazakhstan, right? So, do I need to do that anymore? Frankly, no. I am fine gathering information for the books. Thinking of clever endings for the final climate change. Stuff like that.
So I think a lot of folks think, when they think environmental law, they think the traditional lawyer who's going to court, talking to their clients. Does that apply to you all? Do you go to court? Do you have clients? What does that aspect of your job look like?
I no longer go to court. And being a sole practitioner and bringing in people as independent contractors to assist me defines what I do. So I'm no longer going to court, but I have plenty of meetings and engagements and those and opportunities for client advice. And one of the things that I noticed, which is very different between government and private practice and maybe institutional practice, is the relationship one has with one's clients. Many of my clients are government agencies. I have a contract with the Maryland Department of Transportation to do environmental work, not the purple line, not that highway stuff, but other aspects. And the client wants to make the decision. And so there's something one learns about being a lawyer and working with a client and delivering advice in a way that's acceptable to the client, that the client can act on. And so that's, the primary aspect of my practice now.
I can jump in that I do not go to court. I do not have clients. I've never gone to court. That ELI, we're non-advocacy and we don't litigate. So it's a little different than some organizations. But we do have partners that we also have funders that we work with. So we do work with external people, but just not in the traditional sense. So we might have a funder meeting if we're being funded by a foundation, updating them on the work that we're doing with their support, but it's not a traditional client relationship. We are not in court.
Same thing. I mean, I think that I see for us, the court is going, same thing, just going to the international meetings. And those are, I mean, kind of like that's what I do. And so we all just, again, we just prepare for that. And something that I didn't mention, but it's very important for us as NGOs, is to partner with other NGOs. So a lot of the work that we do is with coalition of other NGOs, and especially because as advocacy organizations, also the bigger the number of people advocating for something or organizations, there is, I mean, we just have the better success. If we do, that's how we could react.
And I have, I think I may have mentioned it, that I'm fully licensed in New York. In Maryland, I have a certificate from the Court of Appeals that allows me to practice law. One, you can not take any money for doing it at all, so it has to be entirely pro bono. And number two, it has to be for indigent clients. So, okay, fine. And so the last time I was in court was with a young woman who was an illegal alien. And the only reason I was in court with her is because they needed a lawyer who could speak Spanish. So there you go. But I mean, that's fine. You know, I don't hear much about courtroom practice for environmental law. And that's okay. That's okay. I mean, I realize it sounds a little antiseptic to say that I really enjoy a life of writing books. But in fact, I really enjoy a life of writing books. And that's what I do, and I enjoy doing it.
Wonderful. Well, while we have you all here, we definitely want to ask some questions more geared towards mentorship and advice for all of the new professionals who are tuning in today. So to get things started with those questions, as you know, we have many students tuning in who are interested in starting their careers in environmental law. So what's one thing that you wish you had known about the field when you were first starting to practice?
Mhm.
I think that's the hardest question on the list because there are many. The one thing I didn't know because of my career path was how expansive environmental law is and how one could be more directed in determining what issues in environmental law are important to you and craft your career around that issue and that expertise. My career path is different because in a way I lucked into so many wonderful positions and developed my expertise that way. But starting out, one can think about the hot issues coming to the fore. ESG, as Michael says, sustainability. What are the key environmental issues coming up and how can you develop a career around them? And I think that's the one thing I missed out on doing.
This is gonna sound very opposite of what I do, but something I've heard many times since being in the environmental field is starting local. That I know I work on international issues, I work at a global scale, but a lot of times you can make a really big impact on the local community level. And I think that's something that shouldn't be ignored when looking at environmental law, that looking at community groups, things like that, volunteering with them, getting a really good in-depth knowledge of what's needed, because that's what the international things are for. They're to help the people on the ground doing the work that's actually in action. So I think you do need both perspectives, you know, no matter what scale you're going to do. If you want to do federal law, if you want to do state law, that you should get a good read of what's happening in your community and what the issues are, because it's going to impact you. It's going to impact your neighbors, that it's not something you're removed from.
The thing that has always struck me about environmental law is how incredibly nebulous it sounds. You know, environmental law is, you know, it's not like, you know, a robbery, you know, it's just, you know, what? Environmental law, you know, what do you mean by that? It's, and the incredible things that nobody would ever think about that are legal, the issues, right? I think I mentioned about the good old friends in the state of New York. They're the energy office, and I have no idea whether it's the same way now, if this was going back a few years. But anyways, the energy office in New York State got money from the state legislature every year. And they did that, they took that money and they did it to finance things like solar panels on people's roofs and so on and so forth, right? Very cool. Okay, so, one year, a few years ago, the state appropriated 28, I just happen to remember the numbers, $28.3 million, right? And this energy office ran through the $28.3 million. And unfortunately, the legislature had adjourned for the year. And they just looked at each other and said, well, now what are we gonna do, right? And so somebody said, let's take our portfolio of loans down to Wall Street and refinance it. You know, get loans against our portfolio of loans, get money, more money. And so they did that, and they get down to Wall Street, and Wall Street says, let me just ask you a question. You got about 55 or 60 loans in your little bag here, and they're to people like Mike Curley, right? For a solar panel for Mike's roof. Are you kidding me? You think Mike Curley's creditworthy? And do we need 60 Mike Curleys? I don't think so. So the answer is no. You know, you don't get any more money. You just wait for the state. So what happened is somebody in Albany let the water guys, I don't know what the state water agency is called in New York, but they let the water guys know. And water agencies throughout the United States are AAA rated institutions. And the reason for that is because of the financial structure that comes through the Clean Water Act, right? So anyways, here's the Clean Water Act sitting there with a AAA rating, right? No financial problems at all, ever, right? And there's the energy agency with nothing to do, just looking out the window because they ran out of money, right? So the question came up, why doesn't the state energy agency take the state water agency down to Wall Street and get the water agency to guarantee the bonds of the energy agency? Yeah? Okay. Well, so somebody in the water agency was coherent enough to realize that they should ask EPA about this. So they sent EPA a letter and they said just what I told you, that we're, you know, they need a financial guarantee. And frankly, financial guarantee may be an exotic concept to you. It involves nothing. Okay? I mean, it involves nothing. You just write your name and say, you know, if they don't pay, I will. Okay? And so, did it impact the water agency's credit rating? Not a bit. And well, so anyways, they asked EPA, they said, this is what needs to happen here in New York. We think that the energy agency, since they finance things like solar panels, that reduce the need for chimneys with smoke, right? And the smoke particles wind up in the water as water pollution, right? Which is a problem for us. So we think it's a good idea, and especially since it doesn't cost us anything, that the water agency can guarantee the state air agency, because what they do helps us, right? You know what EPA did? They said, we got your letter. It sounds like a good idea. Go ahead and do it. In that many words. How many of you all have ever had any interaction with government that ended like that? Right? So anyways, yes. And by the way, the guy that wrote that letter, the same guy that realized that the Clean Water Act with the grants was rubbish and decided to turn it into a loan program, and did. So talk Congress into doing it. So but anyways, that gives you an idea of what some of the background is.
just adding up to that is that, what I could think of is that there's a lot of options in environmental law. I mean, it's just like, I mean, I mean, to me, I always was fixated with the international organizations and all of that. I mean, I knew what I wanted. But I think that just saying everything is like, there's so many things that you can do in environmental law. So I just don't just see what could be. I mean, you can work in so many government areas, not just, I mean, for example, the other day I was talking to a friend of mine who works for the Department of she works for is it Department of Telecommunications or is Office of something, the government, there's a branch on telecommunications, and they hire, for example, a biologist. I mean, I know this is not the point, but it's like a biologist in telecommunications. So it was like, there's a need of environmental law is like, it's everywhere. And I think that you just don't look into one thing, but just there's so many options.
I wanted to add one thing to what Alejandra said, and that is to be intentional in your selection of a particular field or area of specialty in environmental law. I think that's more important than ever because obviously we want to have jobs. We want you to have jobs. And so some of this is tea leaf reading to think about what are the big issues coming up in the future. What is your area of interest and potential expertise, and how do you make a match?
And let me go back and that long pointless story I told you about New York. What's the ending to it? The ending to it is that, yes, the water agency in New York guaranteed the bonds. And so the energy agency got another $28.3 million to go out and make more energy loans. Very cool. But here's the bad news. They never did it again. Number one, right? So the next year, the energy people, you know, they went and told the legislature, you know, we ran out of money. And the legislature said, oh dear, we can't do that, you know, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, and after people like me publicized what the state of New York had done, right? And it was a subject of many interesting discussions at many meetings of the water people and so on and so forth. And the other 49 states, how many of them do you think did it? Not a one. Not a one. And that sort of brings me to another wonderful conclusion, is that the Clean Water Act, I think I told you, in 1972, it was grants, and then it changed to loans, right? Okay, so here's the way it works. Congress appropriates money, they give it to EPA. EPA gives, there's a formula that Congress set up that they give the money to the states, right? And so when the states have the money, the state, from EPA to the state is a grant. But now that the state has the money, they can't do grants anymore. They have to do loans, okay? Did anybody bother to think about Farmer Jones? I mean, it's okay when you think about the Detroit Sewer Authority. The Detroit has, you know, 1.7 million people, and there's 385 sewer connections, and the sewer connections are, you know, $21 a month or something else like this. So we raised the price from $21 to $22 a month, and that's how we pay for the new sewage treatment plant that we need in Detroit, right? Okay, well, what about the farmer that's down the road in Michigan that's got a couple thousand head of cattle and a CAFO? If you don't know what a CAFO is, environmentally, you must learn. It's a concentrated animal feeding operation. And it's like a giant tent in the middle of nowhere, right? And that's, they bring all the cattle in there and they make sure that they're well fed. But can you do environmentally know what happens in these sheds where the cattle are in terms of the gas that the cattle produce and the waste that the cattle produce, right? It stays there, right? So how to get rid, so you got Farmer Jones, right? You remember, this is a loan program. Okay, so we need Farmer Jones to put environmental controls to suck up all the methane, right? And to get all of the animal waste and put it into a thing that cleans it, right? Or that at least detoxifies it so it can be used as fertilizer or whatever. We need to do this, right? Okay, and it's gonna cost X dollars. So we're gonna lend Farmer Jones the money to do that, right? Are you nuts? Do you think Farmer Jones is nuts? Why in the name of God is he gonna borrow money to do that and then have to pay it back? Right? So, wait a second. You go back and look at the law, the Clean Water Act, you can't make grants, can you? Okay, but guess what? The city of Detroit, right? They need $6 million, right? Farmer Jones needs $1 million. So here's what you do. You go to the city of Detroit and say, you need $6 million and we'll give it to you. And here's the terms, $6 million at 4%. Okay, and X number of years, 20 years to pay it back. Or $7 million at 3%. Do the math. You're saving money. And you give the extra $1 million to Farmer Jones as a grant. Because we can't give grants, but you can. Right? So we're gonna give you $7 million and you're gonna pay it all back, but at a much lower rate of interest, right? Okay, because we can't give a grant to Farmer Jones, but you can. And despite that being true, it's never been done. It's never been done. The guys there's some special rule about there are 23 organizations in the United States which are multi-state sort of quasi-environmental organizations. And if you are lucky enough to get their authority, right? They have legal authority that nobody else does. Okay, and it's transboundary. So the folks in Minneapolis, the state of Minnesota, they had a Farmer Jones problem and they solved it by going to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. These areas that I'm telling you about, the Mississippi Valley is one of them. And it's called the something Terrebonne. You would think it would be called the Mississippi Valley District. It's not. It's called the Barataria Terrebonne, which are two little villages in Louisiana, but they named it after that instead of the Mississippi River, which is of course what the whole thing is.
So to punctuate what Michael
No,
is
just let me just
saying-
finish, Carol.
Oh, excuse me.
So because they're in this slice of one of the 23 sections of the United States, Minnesota and Louisiana are in the same one. They got the board of directors for the Barataria Terrebonne district to approve them doing what I just told you about with Farmer Jones in Minneapolis, because that geographic district had the authority, but the state didn't. And so, and by the way, the great stuff that the Minneapolis has done, you'd think that the other, I think there's 13 states in the Mississippi territory, you'd think that they'd all get on the boat and do it. Not another one has ever done, and not only that, but Minnesota has never done it again. You just wonder, so scratch your head sometimes and you wonder, what are we doing here with this environmental stuff? Why aren't people doing it? But there you go.
I wanted to punctuate what Michael is saying with a recognition of what he learned in his field of study, environmental law, about loans, about the Clean Water Act, and what is needed, and how he's able, based on that expertise, to articulate innovative strategies for fixing problems. That's an amazing model. And if we could each aspire to that and think about an area of expertise to build on, wow, we could change the world. So thank you, Michael.
I also want to ask you all about mentorship. So could you explain a little bit what role mentorship played in your legal journey, and how can law students and new lawyers find mentors?
Well, I can start off with it because I've already talked about half of it. There's this guy at EPA that I've mentioned a couple times. When I was banging around doing my studies and they had never met a banker before, he was the guy. And he said, "You've made loans. You know how to make a loan?" I said, "Yeah." "Will you come and, show me how to make a loan and show my team how to make a loan and then show the 50 states how to make loans?" So, yeah, okay, fine. But anyways, that was the guy that realized that the grant program in 1972 with the Clean Water Act was a colossal waste of money. And so let's change it to a loan program, right? And he was the guy that set up the Council of Infrastructure Financing Authorities, CIFA. That is essentially the business. It's the, it's the organization of the 50 states that do that. He's been my mentor for since I met him back in the late 80s, 1990. And we're still good. He's retired now, but we're still very good friends and so on and so forth. So anyway, so the subject was mentorship, and he's been a great mentor to me.
Jimmy, I just want to say, so my mentors have been, as I mentioned, we work a lot with other organizations and especially in coalitions, and I have found my mentors there because we work so close with them. So there's a lot of expertise with my colleagues, and that's what I've been getting their guidance. So it's not only in your place of work, but it can also be outside.
To go off of that, one of my good friends and mentors, that she was my supervisor at my last job, that we both started around the same time. She took me under her wing, that she gave me homework that was not part of work, but just to really enrich what I was doing, to deepen my learning. We still talk, that she's a Spanish lawyer. We still talk all the time. She was in DC last summer, so I got to see her, but we do very different things in our careers right now, but we're still very close, and she's always, encouraging me and, trying to expand my horizons, which I greatly appreciate.
So what is mentorship? We always struggle with defining what is it? Is it engaging with someone who has a big listening ear? Is it someone who has more expertise than you have, who can help you chart a career path? Is it someone who knows the lay of the land in DC and who can help motivate you and inspire you to go in the right direction? I think mentorship is all those things. I've certainly been advantaged by having wonderful mentors in my career. When I went into being the assistant chief in environmental enforcement, I had never read an environmental law. And the top officials in the then Lands Division of the Justice Department offered to sit down with me for 2 weeks and teach me about the statutes. That was pretty amazing. Sometimes you can't pick mentors like that, but I highly recommend someone who can help guide you in this path. That's so important. And hope you'll have the opportunity to find someone to do that.
I also wanted to ask about networking, which is similar, but also a little bit different. So how has networking impacted your career, and kind of in a post-COVID world, what networking advice do you have for our current incoming legal professionals?
Well, you write books, that's what you do, network. You call people, and even strangers, and ask them. But like I said, that association on sustainability had a write-up on Dickinson College. And I looked up Dickinson College, and okay, cool. But now I want to know what Dickinson College thinks about their own program. And, what do we like about it, and what do we not like about it, and what do we want to do next? That type of thing. And to do that, you got to pick up the phone and call somebody. And sometimes you ask them, depending on the reaction, if, is, well, you can always ask, if, have you got anything written on what we're talking about? And if not, is there anybody around that could write it? That type of thing. So, yeah, networking, and networking in my business, which is, publishing stuff on environmental law, that's how you do it.
I think networking is a two-way street. Networking is your being out there and engaging with others and having others engage with you. And networking can be in the field of environmental law in which you're interested. It could be in a field that Alejandra's talking about that's related to environmental law. It could be networking in an organization. It could be networking here at ELI. That's a wonderful opportunity that brings us all together. And so I can't recommend it enough that how important it is in these post-COVID days where we're still a little bit isolated to enhance network.
I'd say that most of my networking comes from my universities. So tonight I'm going to an Ohio State event that they're having. You never know who you're going to meet. I went to Denison University for undergrad. I love going to Denison events. I mean, career-wise, yes, but also it's really fun to see people. I love talking about Denison. So, I mean, it's fun. I'd say, ELI offers a lot of opportunities for networking within the environmental sphere. I'm a member of a Women in International Law group. We have, events every couple of months that I try to go to. And even if it's not something like, okay, I'm finding a new project or a new funding source out of this, it gives me ideas of, oh, I'm thinking about working on this. I can call so-and-so because we talked about that a few months ago. So, I mean, I know it can be kind of nerve-wracking, but it generally is a good thing to do.
I can't let the topic of networking go by without mentioning environmental law and leadership at ELI. It's an organization intending to enhance opportunities in the field for women and men and promote educational experiences. Look for us on the eli.org website. It's really just a fabulous networking opportunity.
I second everything that they just said. I mean, I don't have much to add. I think that's the basic. And I would just encourage my old-fashioned part, but it helps to do networking in person. I'm still kind of like
Sure.
that. I mean, it's very important, of course, if you're gonna have to contact like in New York State or just Ohio or other places, and that helps. But if you're in the same location, I encourage people to be there.
Wonderful. We have about 13 minutes before I'm going to turn to audience questions. So for our online audience, please keep putting your questions in the Q&A box. I can see them over here. And then to our in-person audience, just a few more minutes and I'll turn things over to you. But before that, I'm going to ask a couple last questions I had, just distinguishing different parts of environmental law work. So first, does anyone want to share their perspective with government or nonprofit work and how you get into that type of work? So do you have any advice for those who want to work at a nonprofit or in the government? Because sometimes it can be difficult to learn how to break into that.
Well, one thing to know about breaking into government work is there are very well-defined rules of the road. And if you're interested in working in a particular agency with a particular mission, understand what their rules are for application, where they publish job announcements. See if you can find a friend in the agency who can educate you, because it's very much following the rules of the road.
And then for the nonprofit world, there's a lot also of who you know. So if you know somebody also in the organization, know somebody else. I mean, it's a lot of it's connections. I mean, also following all the website. I mean, all the websites where you want, but it's a lot of like, oh, I know so and so. A lot of, for example, some organizations have incentives of the employees if they can recommend somebody else for the positions. So you might I mean, so that might be very helpful.
I really don't have that much to add. I think I might fall outside of that. I didn't know anyone at both places. I've had my jobs post law school, so I think that's a little more unusual, but I'd say follow what you're passionate about. If it comes through on your resume, on your cover letter, that's, if you are pretending to be passionate about something, they're gonna be able to see through that. So really put yourself out there for what you're interested in.
But also wanted to touch on policy work for a minute because a lot of people think more about traditional law when they're thinking about environmental law, but environmental law can also involve a lot of policy work. So does anyone here want to explain how policy work can differ from traditional legal work? And do you find that there are any advantages or disadvantages to doing policy work?
I guess that's me.
What?
I guess that's me, exactly. So yeah, so most of my work is policy work, and it's, I mean, yeah, it's kind of like I already explained, but it's working a lot of like supportive materials, advocacy materials. So I really like that. But the interesting part of that is that also you can collaborate with other parts of the organization. For example, I work a lot with the scientific, our scientific department, because you need to be very well, I mean, that information and supportive documents, they have to be very well prepared and documented for example, for me, kind of like for your targeted audience, which are the governments, to be able to believe what you just, to have like a trust in you and what you're just developing. So it is, yeah, providing and gathering all the information in either reports or in fact sheets or whatever, but it's cool because, yeah, you work with different type of people to be able to produce materials that can be trusted. And then in the future, if that happens, then in the future, your targeted audience, which are for me are the governments, they're going to be able to, they're going to go to you for more information or for you to help them go and develop, for example, I don't know, conservation plans or develop management plans or develop strategies. So, I mean, policy work includes a lot of things, and I really enjoy that.
I no longer do policy work per se, but my clients do. My government agency clients are embedded in policy, and I have to know what their policies are in order to deliver advice with which they can deal. And the other aspect of policy work is that when you think about the environmental laws, they are embedded in policy. Each administration has a different policy that governs how to interpret and apply environmental law, so that you really can't get away from understanding what is the underlying policy of a particular law or an objective of an agency or a nonprofit.
One more question from us. So as you all have been talking about this whole time, environmental law is a very diverse field, intersects with so many different career paths. How do you recommend that someone who's just maybe now entering law school or even in their undergraduate career, how do you recommend that they find an area that is a good fit for them? Oftentimes, Clean Water Act, CERCLA and RCRA, all of those can be very ambiguous. So where should they start first?
Start with what you're interested in.
Yeah.
If you're interested in water, you might not know a lot about the Clean Water Act. And maybe Clean Water Act isn't what you want to do. Maybe you want to work on, environmental justice and water issues. Maybe you want more of a human rights angle to water. Maybe you want to look more at endangered species and water. But just take what you're interested in and try to find out as much as you can, because I can assure you there's going to be something related to environmental law and you can find that angle. Don't pick something you're not interested in, because you're not going to enjoy your career, and it's not going to feel as meaningful. So I would really just start with what you're interested in and do a deep dive.
or try to find like a different niche to something. It's like, oh, you know, that could be it. And then you just go and look for that. I think that's interesting.
I think part of the answer is be informed. Be informed, read newspapers, read journals, read scientific articles. One of the things we haven't talked about is the merger of environmental law and hard science. And if you're good in science, or if you have a scientific background, that may direct your intention in selection of the field to a particular area. The more expertise you have, the more knowledge you have, the more you're able to find something about which you will have a passion. And and how lucky we are to be able to work in an area where we can have a passion. It's not like doing tax work, excuse me. Some people have a passion for tax law, but think about something that really excites you, that will enable you to change the world. And go for it.
Okay, one last question from me before we turn to all of our audience questions here. Do you have any stories from your career that you wish to share with our audience? It could be a funny story or just something that you found really impactful over your career.
I don't know if I have a funny story. It's not funny. It's just like very satisfying, you know, when you do the job. And for example, and same thing, when my target audience appreciate or really takes on whatever you've been providing them as information or a material or a plan or something. And then you see that, for example, for me to see that satisfying in an international like meeting or fora, when you have that in a fora, and then it's kind of like, oh, and thanks to this, for example, for providing me, or you hear them like saying something that you've been advocating to them, and that's like, oh my God, that is just so satisfying. And that's like that is a big thing. It's like they just said one sentence to whatever you just prepare for them, like so much information. Then for them to just take one sentence of what you've been giving them. I just want to say that, I mean, it's not a fun story, but it's like, it's very satisfying to get to that point. So whatever you're gonna look forward to, or whatever you're gonna look forward to, it's like, I don't know, it's like also, it's like there's always like very small successes are just so big. I mean, people might not see it like, oh my God, I changed the entire EPA law, the entire ESA, for example, right? No, you're not going to get there. But it's like, you know, you were just advocating for that word change or whatever, for example, you know what, that is big. I mean, just take those little successes as very big successes, and it's just, and you'll feel so satisfied with yourself and yeah.
I think, I can share. I mean, this was a story that my high school self would have thought was really cool. That I did Model UN in high school. And last year I was in New York for a conference at NYU. And one of my colleagues was like, oh, like you should go to the UN and, you know, chat with some of my colleagues at the UN Environmental Program. And like, you know, 16-year-old Christine was like, me? The UN? And I just thought it was the coolest thing. Like, it will always be cool. I don't care how many times I get to do it, you know, going to the UN and getting to share my ideas and what I'm working on and hear about what they're working on. And for them to be excited, like that was something really special. And I still need to email my high school Model UN coach.
One of the, as you obviously can see that my entry into environmental stuff has a lot to do with finance. And the gentleman that I was telling you about that changed the Clean Water Act and he also came up with he realized back in the days when we were talking about the fact that there was nobody in any of the 50 states that had ever made a loan before, and now what are we going to do, right? He created the Environmental Financial Advisory Board at EPA. And when I say he created it, he came up with the idea, and I don't know who I guess it was the head of the agency, right? That had to approve it, but it got approved. And since 1989, the Environmental Financial Advisory Board has been there at EPA, giving opinions on just about everything that have to do with finance. And so, you know, change the world. Yeah. You know, wake up one day and realize that, you know, the environmental stuff is very cool, but without money, without finance, it goes nowhere. And so we got to get our environmental finance together. And so, yeah, I think back when I was, this is a wonderful little story. The Environmental Financial Advisory Board is a federal advisory committee. And there is a thing called the Federal Advisory Committee Act, FACA, F-A-C-A, right? And under FACA, you can be appointed to a federal advisory committee for 3 years. And then you can be appointed for a second term. You got that? I served 21 consecutive years on that board. How? There apparently is some, and I don't know what the law says, but apparently there is some glitch or there's some provision in the law that says you can go to if the inspector general can waive the rule for reason. And so every third year, right, somebody at EPA would take the Curley again, and they would take it to the inspector general and he'd say, yeah. And, and there we go. So, instead of serving 6 years, 21. And, needless to say, I enjoyed it. It was very, very nice.
Right. Thank you all so much for answering all of our many questions, but we're getting just as many from our audience online. So I'm going to read a couple of online questions first, and then we'll turn to our in-person audience. So we have a couple of job-related questions from our audience that I'm seeing here. So the first one is, what is the job market like right now for environmental lawyers, and what are good ways to search for environmental law jobs?
I was just gonna say, I know there's for the nonprofit world, there's Idealist. That's kind of like a website, and I don't know what's the state of the current job market.
On the ELI weekly newsletter, there's a job posting at the bottom of it. So if you don't sign up for our newsletter plug, it's at the bottom of the Monday newsletter that have open positions. And I think it's a variety of all types of environmental fields.
We also have someone who asks, what kind of jobs would you recommend for someone who recently graduated from college but is taking a couple of years before pursuing law school for environmental law? So is there anything that would be good for folks who know they want to do law school, but not quite yet?
So depending on what that person is interested in doing, maybe being a legal assistant or a paralegal in a law firm, especially if that person has some special credential, like a scientific background or a mathematical background, that would be a good focus. I think sometimes in working in those jobs, one learns what one loves and what one does not love. So it's a good opportunity.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to the previous question. There's also the IUCN World WCEL, so World Commission of Environmental Law. And they also have like a newsletter. So if you're interested in an international arena, so the IUCN WCEL, and just look for that as a newsletter.
Do you have any questions in the room that folks would like to ask? Just one hand. If you could wait for Sarah to bring a microphone around, just so our virtual audience can hear you too.
Hi, this is for Mr. Curley. I was curious, could you elaborate a little bit more on ESG and how it has transformed the environmental arena?
On ESG,
Yeah.
it's sort of the other way around. It's the S has I guess sort of to start off in the old days, is that when it was sustainability, everybody thought, oh, that's environmental, right? And then as things moved on, people began to realize it ain't just environmental. There's a social element to this as well. And it just took on a life of its own. You know, when I say that, ESG is, that the S is a really welcome element to ESG, because it's ESG that's the issue. You know, you can't have, you can't have sort of a pristine environmental program if it's, you know, men over 35 only running it, you know, that type of thing, and white men over 35 running it, right? So that's, and other types of issues like that. So it's very much of a welcome addition to the entire concept. And as I said, it broadens it a little bit from just environmental. So you put the S in there, and and then what you do is when you're writing books about it, you always just tell people that ESG is how you spell sustainability. And that's where it all comes together. This is a sustainable policy is a policy that is both environmental and social, it's sustainable. So.
Thank you.
Hi, Michael. Over the last year, I've been thinking a lot about adaptation, and as you know, EPA now has an adaptation office. And one of the things that occurred to me is I wondered if you have been thinking about whether there's a tension between sustainability and adaptation, and whether that adaptation is impacting your work on sustainability.
I don't think so. I don't think there's a conflict between the two of them, because I think that adaptation is a page in the book, which in my case is literally true, only it's about 10 pages. That, you know, if adaptation is what is needed, and there's no other problems with it, go ahead and do that. But if you need more than that, go the extra mile as well. The adaptation question comes up a lot in the subject of resilience and with coastal stuff, you know, and I guess the bottom line is, if adaptation works for the problem, use it. If it doesn't, discard it, and that's it.
I was also curious about when you mentioned the title of your book, your novel.
You mean the final climate change?
Yeah. Is adaptation, depending on whether you'd like to share what the novel's about, is adaptation a feature of
Yeah, I guess you would say it is, because what it's about is, in 1859, on September 1st, the largest solar flare in history hit the Earth. Okay, and it shorted out all of the electrical systems in the world, on the planet Earth. There weren't a lot at that time in 1859, but it shorted out everything that there was there, right? So since 1859, let's just sort of call for fun, let's call 1859 the start of the Industrial Revolution, and just say for the last, what, 175 years, we've been pumping carbon into the atmosphere from all of the wonderful smokestacks that support the Industrial Revolution, right? All of our utilities, the coal-fired utilities, right? They all, anyway, all these smokestacks, so on and so forth. What you're asking about the novel? What the novel asks the question, the principal character in the novel tells the President of the United States that we've been pumping carbon into the atmosphere, billions of tons of carbon into the atmosphere since 1859, Mr. President. And the solar flare that hit the Earth, it was described in the British press by a young Scottish scientist named Richard Carrington, and it has become known as the Carrington event, right? So the Carrington event is the largest solar flare. And so the question for the final climate change is, what impact will another Carrington event have on the billions of tons of carbon that are locked up in the atmosphere that weren't there in 1859, the last time a solar flare hit? So that's what it's sort of about.
Cool, thank you.
Good.
Any other questions in the audience, or else I'll take more virtual questions? Oh yeah, there's one more up here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Justin Ballard. Thank you for your time here. I have a question for Alejandra. You mentioned that you're a foreign trade lawyer that then came to the United States for a master's. Was that an LLM by any chance? Okay. What was the process of that like? Because, you know, you eventually came back to the States of being a foreign trained lawyer, but then also having an American master's. What was navigating the American environmental law industry like, especially compared to American JDs? Because my understanding is that sometimes they're like viewed more favorably because they have 3 years as opposed to 1.
So I don't know the comparison, but what I can tell you is that I did 5 years of law degree. My law degree was 5 years. Then the LLM is, yeah, it was 1 year. So I did take some similar like JD basic classes to understand the basic US system. So I don't know, because for me, I never intended to practice here in the US. So I was not looking forward to, let me take the administrative laws. I mean, I didn't intend that. So when I did my LLM, I knew I wanted to do international law. So I think that to me, and I never intended to take the bar exam. That was not, I was like, I didn't want to go to the courts. I didn't want to, do litigation. So I just wanted policy work. So I think that, I thought it was going to be very challenging. That's why actually I started working as a legal assistant in a law firm. And then, I understood like, yeah, in terms of parallel, I don't really know how compared to a JD person, but yes, that's why I was like, I'm gonna go into a law firm a little bit just to get the feel of it, and then just to get a little bit of background and trying to level up a little bit. But I always thought that my 5 years of law degree, I know that it's different legal system and everything, but especially the work, knowing the work that I wanted to do, I thought that it was what I was doing what I thought would be needed. But then it gets limited on what I could do. But
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Mr. Curley, you have experience dealing with water infrastructure financing, both in the US and in some other countries. So what things do you think the US does well in terms of that water infrastructure financing relative to other countries? Are there any things that we do more poorly? And generally, are there any lessons from different ways that different countries deal with that when it comes to climate resiliency and building infrastructure to make places resilient from the effects of climate change?
Well, the answer to your question about do we do a good job? We do a phenomenal job. And frankly, the problem of water infrastructure or clean water infrastructure and water infrastructure follows the path of development throughout the world. As you might imagine, there are places in South America, that you don't get high quality services, water, sewer, that type of thing, drinking water. And the same thing is true in Africa, parts of Africa and parts of Asia. It's the same story about development itself. Nothing different, pretty much.
Okay, thank you.
And one more up front and then, or actually there's two up front and then I'll do a couple online to close this out.
Hi, thank you all for being here. My name is Eliana. I'm a current undergraduate at Georgetown, and I was wondering, as you are collaborating with so many different partners in your environmental law work, and also as like a aspiring environmental lawyer myself, I was curious about what you look for in your collaborators or potential new hires. Like what kind of indicators of characteristics or experiences are really valuable to you?
Well,
You go ahead. No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
so I mean, I think that it depends, I mean, yeah, starting for an entry level, I think that to me, the most important is passion and enthusiasm on the topic. Because I think that when you have that, you just, yeah, you can go much further and other things.
Exactly. And I was just gonna say, and, you know, falling in love with the topic, is it, you don't fall in love with, you know, outdoor plumbing, right? You fall in love with the idea of clean water. And that's where you need to be. And when you do that, you're fine. And where you go after that is also fine. Because we need help everywhere.
My collaboration works in the opposite way, that someone asked me to collaborate with them. And I'm thinking of two examples. One where I have an existing client who says, I want to do this deal and acquire this piece of real estate, and it's really exciting for my business, but it's contaminated. What kind of suggestions would you make? And the other kind of collaboration is government requests for proposal. When government is seeking responses from individuals or law firms or policy groups to assist it in effectuating its purpose.
Did we have one more question of you?
Hi, Elena. Sorry if there's confusion between Eliana. Thank you guys so much for your time. Everybody has such a broad degree of experience, which is really great. My question is to you, Ms. Green. I'm really curious if you could maybe speak to a little bit of the distinction between your experience at DOJ with the government and then now as private practice. And as someone that has only been in public service, that shift is kind of hard for me to kind of imagine. So how did you kind of do that? And then are you restrictive in who you work with in the private world? And how do you navigate all of that? Because we do see a lot of, not the best actors. So just kind of working within those lines and,
So Elena, that's such a great question. In many ways, private practice and government service are the same because you're problem solving and coming up with answers in the environmental realm in both contexts. I think one of the major differences, as you alluded to, is client representation. Client representation in government is primarily affected by the policies and objectives of the government agency. And that's not for you to decide. It's a context in which you operate. In private practice, I've been just incredibly fortunate. Maybe it's my enforcement background, but I have never had a client that rejected my advice for complying with the environmental laws. Sometimes that doesn't happen. I think, though, there's a partnership that one affects in working with private entities. And part of it is an educational experience where you can provide information and a sense of responsibility and sustainability and being green. And some companies are willing to listen and to adopt or adapt those policies and some not. And so I think the primary difference between government service and private is the extent to which you can influence the client's choice of action.
Take a couple quick questions from our virtual audience, because they have quite a few here too. Someone was asking about opportunities for those who don't have a legal degree. So does anyone here want to speak about what opportunities there are and ways that non-lawyers can get into the environmental law field? I know it's a little different from it, but as much as you all have interacted with.
So what comes to mind immediately is, other than practicing law, there are also many associated environmental areas in which one can work. I think practicing environmental law is a marriage between knowing the law and having the technical support. So for example, I'm working with a company that is doing due diligence, investigating the condition of property it wants to acquire, on which it wants to develop retail and home condominiums. And I have a consultant who's a geologist, for example, who's experienced in understanding how to take samples in the groundwater samples, and read the results. Sometimes you need a consultant who knows about air emissions, sometimes water. So there are all these related fields if one has expertise. Numbers are very important in the environmental area, and risk assessment. One of the environmental statutes, the Toxic Substances Control Act, was amended recently, and the cornerstone is risk assessment of chemicals. And so there are many areas that, other than law, where one can find something to do.
And in my field, I just want to compliment on my field, it's diplomacy, international relations, and just, the international arena. So, and scientists a lot, as I said, because we do work a lot of like species information. So we always have to gather information on what is the status of the species. And it's very helpful to have, we always consult scientists, or for example, on how much of our exploitation is affecting biodiversity. So a lot of information on biodiversity loss. So we get a lot of experts on that field, and it's always helpful to know about diplomacy.
There's a question here for Christine or Alejandra. Do you have any resources of where an intermediate Spanish speaker could engage with or learn environmental law or environmental justice in Spanish?
Where?
Or maybe just opportunities to get involved, or how does your work intersect with kind of Spanish speaking?
I mean, if you want to, if there's an excitement, so there's a lot of YouTube videos about internet. So every meeting that I go to, I go to the Convention on Migratory Species, the CBD, the Biological Diversity CITES, they're all streamed on YouTube. Things like since COVID, they're all streaming YouTube. So if you want to get, how it's always good, it's like just watch soap opera, Mexican soap, but like Mexican soap opera, like Latin American soap. Sorry, I'm advocating for the Mexicans, but Latin American soap opera is just. But in terms of like, if you want to get like the vocabulary, just go in YouTube, and you're gonna fall asleep. So much is being streamed, and so you just go and join them. So it's a little bit more exciting if they're live. So then it's like you don't know, but you can listen to all those meetings and get the vocabulary, and then there's always the Spanish option. But always, I'm sure the thing is that all the events that are here, they're always going to be in English. But if you cannot go to those meetings, just listen to the YouTube. Yeah.
I would say we have some resources on our website, some reports that I've worked on that are in Spanish. Whoever asked that question, you can find my email on our website. Email me, I'll email you some resources, some organizations that I know about that you might be interested in.
And IUCN too, IUCN has a lot like in Spanish and variously in all the languages, so.
One last question online, and then I'll ask a closing question for you all, but someone was wondering what opportunities there are for folks who are more advanced in their career who now want to go back to and enter into the field of environmental law. So rather than someone whose first experience with environmental law, helping others break into the field.
I would say that, again, plugging one of my projects at ELI, we have the Pro Bono Clearinghouse, which attorneys can join. And some of them are environmental adjacent pro bono opportunities, so helping a community group form a 501(c)(3), something like that, where they could, learn more about the issues, but do something that they're still comfortable with. Some organizations looking for pro bono assistance are looking for background research. So that would give you a chance to kind of dive in, but you're not doing something super complex under the Clean Water Act. So I'd say that's an opportunity. It's not paid. It, of course, is pro bono, but to give you kind of a taste of what some environmental law might be.
One thing you can do if you're thinking about career advancement is do a business plan for career advancement and think about what information you need in order to define that next step. One of the things I did at one point in my career was talk to various individuals who are known as well-established practitioners and ask them, would they provide introductions for me to meet with other people in different areas so I could gather information? And what's great about doing that is you're not asking for a job. You're asking for information based on that person's expertise. So I think that's a really good tactic and strategy for somebody who's looking to change fields. Learn a lot that way.
Well, we're in our last few minutes here, so just wanted to give you all an opportunity to provide any closing remarks or anything that we didn't ask about that you would like to impart upon our audience.
Well, for me, thank you. And I thank everyone who has been here and my colleagues for participating. It's been so interesting to hear the questions and the answers. One of the things we didn't discuss and I want to throw out for future thinking is that environmental law today is very different than it used to be. In the past, at least from my perspective, environmental law was within a context, a particular statute or a particular realm that defined what was environmental law. But think today about what is environmental law and the breadth of the field. It's environmental justice, it's sustainability, it's greenhouse gases, it's ESG. And there isn't necessarily one system of laws that defines what are the obligations and objectives yet. So I think the world is open and it's really exciting.
I would say if you're interested in anything that I talked about in my career, that we are having kind of a bonus summer school session in August on human rights and the environment. Can't quite remember the date of that, but look for it.
Late August.
Late August. So if you're interested in human rights and the environment, it will be me and a special guest kind of diving into more issues and doing a deeper dive. And again, thank you, Madison. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to my co-panelists and to the audience.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madison, for all of you for coming, for your interest, and just get all the energy that you have, and then thanks for my time.
I can't add anything to what Carol said. She said it all. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for having interest in these matters. And as you can see, there's a whole world out there to learn about. So thank you and go to it.
Well, thank you all so much. Thank you to all of our wonderful speakers. Thank you, Carol, Christine, Alejandra, and Michael so much. We so appreciate your time. For our in-person audience, we're hoping our speakers can stick around for a few minutes if you'd like to chat with them. For our virtual audience, we hope to see you next week. We'll kick off our webinar series next Tuesday at the same time, 12 Eastern for NEPA and the EFA. Have some pretty good speakers lined up for that one as well. Please join us back next week, and you can register for all of our summer school sessions online. We'll be here every week through the end of July. But thank you for your engagement and for your many questions, and see you next week.
Thank you.
Let's see if there's anyone else.